going to talk to us about workforce planning and a little bit around his belief around some of the trends related to kind of moving away from kind of typical, like looking at attrition and modeling that way and more about talent forecasting. So with that, I am going to let Peter take over, and we'll do questions at the end if there's time.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, here we go with the presentation. So I said this before in my quick demo session, but we're a people analytics company with an extreme passion around the workforce planning aspect of it and really helping organizations be more effective. It's a tough challenge, actually, because workforce planning is an area there's a lot of everyone does it, right? But everyone has their own ideas of how to do it. So there's a lot of lift sometimes to get off the ground. So a lot of the thinking over the years is like, how do you actually get this lift done in an effective way? If people like what we talk about, we have a booth out there, right there, and my colleagues, Chris and Kim right there, also can set up demos and things like that. So hope you want to learn more as well. So my key takeaways for today are twofold. One is, I would say this is like a journey that started around sort of 2015, which is how to use machine learning and predictive analytics to conduct more effective strategic workforce planning. And then the second part is, how do you start now adapting your strategic workforce planning strategy to proactively address the advent of Gen AI around it, which is a different form of AI. So I think there's a lot of hype around AI overall, but it's obviously been something with us for quite some time, a lot of applications for it. And I think it's important to segment out and use the right type of AI for the right type of challenges that you have. So key takeaway number one is, how do you use machine learning and predictive analytics to conduct more effective SWP? So the thing that I would say about this is that when we first got in to the workforce planning realm, we thought this is super simple. It's demand supply. You'll yield gaps. You'll have more effective talent supply chain and HR strategy. And then we found out that many organizations actually even though they're planning all the time, they didn't actually know how to plan, and they got really stuck in the issues. I think there's just a presentation around a lot of interest around the data quality issue, but data quality was a really big problem. If even one headcount was out of place, someone would have a fit and be like, I have the wrong baseline, I can't do this, and all these different things like that. And so it occurred to us at that point that we're helping organizations do this, and we observe a lot of our customers plan 4 or 5% too high all the time. It's also an art called the budget sandbag as well, which is, I always have enough extra heads or positions. I can always do whatever I want and be sort of controlled by that. We also found another phenomenon that occurred was that HR wanted to perfect this process internally. And basically within the shop, they often would pilot in HR. The business wouldn't care that much about that specifically. And they would also then take a very long time to get out with this. And so by the time all these factors occurred at the time, what would happen is that organizations would just never really get off the ground in terms of workforce planning, because they would take just too long to do this. And they would struggle with this, and they would always be like, hey, what's the point of planning anyway? I'm always too high. It's not really giving me instructions. It doesn't help us recruit better. It doesn't help us develop better. It doesn't help us with our goals in general. So this is what the first slide is, which is workforce planning without machine learning. And so there's a little formula here, which is the 5 + 2 = 7. What we found is that we delivered this to people, but they were doing it in silos. So each either HR business partner for each role or each hiring manager would do this equation. It's great. They would know that they needed, they had a 5 skill gap. They knew that they had net positions of 2 at the skill. They had good answers for themselves. And they say, okay, it's hires plan plus our attrition. But when that would add up to this much bigger number. So then the idea is to transition to a new model, which is strategic workforce planning with ML. So using ML-based AI, the idea is for each job role and each job skill, it's an ecosystem. And so the ecosystem basically tells you, this equation right here is this 50 minus blah, 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 blah. It basically says, okay, we have this number of people. And then of those number of people, we can predict that first part, which is a very classic workforce planning concept of how many people will we lose through attrition. And that's done through a standard sort of, regression that will basically calculate the risk of each person and what that's going to add up to. But then the idea is like, how many people will move, and can we predict how many people will move from one job to another, either through lateral movement or mobility? And then also how many people will move out. And then also how many interns will we convert through all these big investments we're making. And then how many do we need? And then we started layering on a process which we called a behavioral forecast for demand. And so just out of a quick rate, how many people have been involved here with the workforce planning effort of some sort? Cool. How many people said the business, it's been great, we have demand drivers from the business, and we're going to drive it off of data we have in the business, either in finance or in operations to do that? How many have had that happen to them? And then how many of that actually did the data ever connect? So it's like diminishing returns in the discussion. So one of the things we realized about companies is that from a sociological perspective, companies are like tribal, and they're like these large organizations that behave in certain ways, and that cuts across leadership and different changes. And so most large companies that we work for basically behave the same way again and again, and they're in a certain business, so they have certain margins. They have certain jobs which are known to be critical, whether you've done segmentation or anything else. They have those jobs that they know that they're going to hire for and always approve. They have a whole bunch of other jobs that there's always a standard process of how do I approve a rec? How long does it take? How long does it take to get the machinery running? And it ends up being this very consistent output. So what we observed over a period of time is that even though we were seeing people plan 4 or 5% too high, we found that we could usually predict within under a percent likelihood of what headcount would be 1 year or 2 years in the future, et cetera, based upon that different area. So then that yields a business demand model and tells you, okay, so I know I'm going to have 41 after all these supply changes. I know I'm likely to need 52, or if I behave as I normally do, business as usual. So I have a hiring gap of 11. So the idea is that you're combining all these inputs and all that. But the extra area, and that's fine. You could actually just do this exercise, you'd be done. But then the important part is these are interacting events. So what happens is every time someone leaves and you replace them, that person who's coming in is going to leave at a higher rate most of the time. Unless it's a really big change, typically that new hire attrition is higher. Every time you promote someone, that person is going to be less likely to leave and is bring your attrition down. Every time you hire a new demand and a high growth that you're not prepared for, that's going to change. So the whole system's a set of interactions where you really need this machine learning based tools to understand and see, okay, well, what's that real number look like that I'm going to need to have for each of my job roles and job skills? That's an important thing. So that gets you then, great, we're done, right? So we have a predictive system, we're in analytics, we basically produce a system for our business, no plans necessary, life is great, we can just roll with this. And the fact of the matter is that there are areas of the business you can do that. There are areas which are slow change, that are not very dynamic. You can basically say, these are the areas that we're just going to rely upon the predictions that we have because we know that nothing has really changed in the business. But then you need a model to decide, well, how do we evolve from that in some way in order to become more effective at thinking about this? So the real way that I think about this is you're telling the business like, hey, instead of this bottoms up thing that everybody does their own thing on spreadsheets and different tools and HR systems, their workforce planning tools, what if we actually prepared and said, this is the mirror, this is the most likely reality that you're going to follow in the absence of actually spending time and thinking about what you should do. And so then the idea is that you have this huge benefit where you get to a nice ground floor, but you're just at a different ground floor. You're at a platform starting out where you can be more successful on that platform thinking about it. But and then at the end part of it, you have these outcomes. You have better internal mobility, better external hiring forecast, better understanding how to manage attrition, better idea of where you have to reduce, better understanding of your skill gaps, your workforce cost, your diversity. And I guess it's a good time to pause briefly and say, in the whole thing about this, that I often say this thing, but if you're in the workforce planning business, invariably you've been asked 50 to 100 times, like, so are you like the two Bobs, right? They think about office space and they think this is what you do. You're actually kind of out there kind of like to harm people in a way and sort of reduce things. Like, I know what workforce planning is. It's a secret thing. In reality, workforce planning is a very altruistic, potentially, initiative where you're looking far enough in the future, where you're actually realizing what your needs are, and then you're actually orienting your supply around that. So it's actually something that if you get involved in, you can be helping an organization and helping the people of the organization at the same time, because when you plan, you can actually then respond to that. So that's an important part. But then there's the missing middle right here, which is in the pink here highlighted, which is the end user planning. So there needs to be a model once you do this predictive model to say, well, this is what we will do. And this is where the good consulting happens within the business or in whatever way you do it to say, but what should we do? And the idea of a predictive model is you're saying, if this is your most likely future, is you're saying, do I like this? What has changed? So then you can start doing your classic workforce planning or strategic workforce planning tools like, what's our competition? What's the talent availability? What is our change in strategy? How does this make impacts on what we're doing? And that's the idea. Then at that point, you're gonna be able to start having users start thinking about their plans and doing that exercise. So this is my personal viewpoint on it is from a large amount of experience around it is that this is work that the business needs to do. They need to be facilitated. There needs to be a mechanism, because if a business leader doesn't have input, they're like not there on the day the plan happened. They're like, that's not my plan. Someone came up with me. That was before I was here. I wasn't in that meeting. It's not the thing they're executing. They're only going to execute on those things that they had the buy-in. So the change management happens through saying, we're going to shift all this effort up front from collecting information. We're not going to exhaust you collecting information. We're going to show you a compelling view of this, what's going to be. You're going to have a light lift in terms of saying, is that right? Or do I need to change based upon these drivers? And then you're involved in the decisions and it's sort of all tagged. And then ideally, one of the things I've always noticed was that when I first got into this business and very much in analytics, it was like, hey, we have so many reasons for attrition. We have our voluntary and voluntary retirement. We have our layoff. Within each of those, we have 10 different categories. We fight over what deceased category it goes in. We fight over other things like that, right? It's like a big deal. But then when we want to plan headcount, we do this whole exercise and it's like, yeah, the number is 52, like I showed. But like, why is it 52? We don't actually track, well, what are our specific reasons why we're going to get there? So the initial reason is like, okay, that's our prediction. All right, so that's our first 11 hires we have. But then as you chip away and move on that, if you actually put one of the key business strategies, you can actually go back and say, hey, let's chart this out and sort of really understand like what are the specific reasons we're deviating from the prediction, what those are. And those have tremendous value because they basically do things like this. They say like, we said these are our 3 key initiatives, but we're adding 2,000 people for things that are not related to this. Or these are our 3 key initiatives and we're adding 1,000 for that and 500 for something completely different, which we missed as something which should have been an initiative because we really thought about the business. So that kind of tracking is really, can be a beautiful thing from an analytics perspective and planning. So the key challenge then is what is the model? And so there's so many different models and there's so many ways to make it very complex. And you can really do a lot of things. You can get into a very data-intensive approach around this. But if you don't have a data-intensive approach, it's really nice to have like a hip pocket tool to use. And the hip pocket tool is really the segmentation. So in the classic realm of workforce planning and management, or any project, you always say, hey, if we're going to do something and we need to make decisions, let's identify the buckets. So let's identify where we have no change in the business, where we need to do more, when we need to do less, and where we need to stop doing. And so in the classic workforce planning, you say, okay, that's a huge bucket of work. It's business as usual. We don't need to do anything. We really need to focus then on the do more and do less. The no change area is where you rely on the predictive. You say, we already know what we're going to do. There's no key input drivers or changes or anything like that, so we're going to do the same thing. The do less is where you're basically saying, these are less critical to our objectives. The do more is like it's much more critical to our objectives. So how do you decide the to-do category? And the way you decide the to categories is looking at a segmentation model. There's a lot out there. This is sort of a model that we've had for a long time. Is sort of like when in doubt, something to start with, is to think about the criticality of the business. And that's where it's important to start thinking about your realm and your timeline. From what I've observed over the course of time is that if you only focus on the strategic, then you can kind of lose the interest of a lot of executives along the way. They have a lot of things they have to achieve that year. They have to hit certain targets. So you have to kind of think about a timeline or time horizon around your business criticality. And so the strategic will be, what are those key bets that we actually don't even know if they're good bets, but if we don't make them, we do huge risks to the business. Key bets in terms of new roles, new skills we need, things like that. But then also the key roles are like, what do we really need to do to make sure we hit these goals easier that we've already set, that we promised the street we're gonna hit these goals to achieve on those. And then there's a big bucket of core work and non-core work. So what we're advocating here in this presentation is, okay, we have this whole predictive model. We thought we were done, we're not quite done. Now we have a lens where we're gonna be looking at and sort of looking at our key areas, and we have a segmentation, which are our glasses that we wear to basically filter and sort through that. And when we do that, we end up with a really nice concept around some sort of matrix around this. So if you think about your strategic and key roles, you have a formula around headcount planning, which is you're gonna grow and you're gonna minimize your vacancy to forecast. If you think about your core roles, you're gonna plan with AI. You're gonna let machine learning do all the heavy lifting. You're not gonna worry about that much, but you might grow or reduce a little bit like your overall company. You're gonna follow the trends or the boat, the boats will all rise or go down with the sea, so to speak. For your non-core roles, you're gonna find where you need to do targeted reductions. For your hiring approach, you're able to say this workforce plan is gonna allow you to decide where you wanna have your pipeline and your proactive hiring. It's not for the whole company, it's a very specific area. For your core roles, you're gonna be reactive. And for non-core roles, you're gonna avoid. From your build, in the classic model, a lot of building the building is not so much for the strategic and key roles. It's always urgent. If you have a shortage or a gap in today's world of workforce planning, kind of before Gen AI, in theory, you might have to always go to market. You might have to go buy a small company that has some critical capability. You're a certain kind of pharma company, you might need to get to market faster. You might have to buy that R&D capability or that manufacturing excellence or whatever it is, or things like that. Or you might have to go and recruit that leader or that whatever that person is right there. But in the core roles, you're gonna say, hey, why are we building? We're not actually gaining anything. We're not actually gaining anything by doing this so much better than everyone else. We need to do it well enough. So we should really look at a high buy in that area. And then from a compensation, you can kind of think about having different strategies, like paying above market for some roles, at market or below for others. And for productivity, you have a different lens as well. So the advantage of a model like this is it allows you to not only decide on where you want to have different headcounts and where you want to focus in that way, but also allows you to start sorting and sifting and thinking about sort of pushing this to your overall HR strategy. And I know that's a key topic throughout conferences like this where everybody here knows it. Like analytics is really key to your effective people strategy and the things you do. And sometimes it's like, it's like yelling in the room with the padding on the wall to get people to notice that. So this is having the workforce planning lens, even if it's not your thing that you do, is a nice way to say these are formulas or matrices. And the idea of the part with this is it's really great to have this kind of segmentation model, say this is how it's gonna really help us make decisions and to drive in that way. So this is the journey up through, I would say, the last couple years, and then sort of the advent of Gen AI and starting thinking about how will that change. So this is my key takeaway one. I can definitely pause if there are any questions so far before I go on to the next topic.
Okay, question. It's wonderful to bring in somebody who's having digital capabilities that are looking from a people and organization perspective.
Mm-hmm.
When you think of similar pieces being done in marketing and sales, it still takes time to adopt.
Yeah.
But still, it's critical. Here, although it's critical, it has a lot more softer and a human touch to it. So how do you think from this first key takeaway that you had, the adoption has been, specifically when you're trying to convert that human touch into more of a mathematical way of saying, hey, this is what I'm predicting and hence this is what you should be. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because I think there's two things. I think it's a multi-part question you asked, which is a great one. The first one is, if I can restate a little bit. First one is, does it change the adoption at all, whether you take this more mathematical approach versus a softer approach? A little bit, right? In my viewpoint, not at all. The denominator of all these equations is sort of like the willpower and the interest and the mindset of the organization. What it does change is the speed to achieve it. So willpower dissolves over time, right? People like, it's like workforce planning is the herding cats discipline. It's like, so people will go in all different directions. So if you have the willpower, I guess, and you can stand something up quickly and get those initial results, my viewpoint is you're more likely to succeed where there is that willpower. I think the issue is if you don't have that sort of will and that goal to do the workforce planning work in a consistent way, it's kind of like anything else. I'm not sure what is. I think what's interesting is that the predictive model lurks in the background. So if you put the predictive model in to predict what your future needs are, and there's lack of readiness, it's like always there. It's like working when you're not working, and there's findings. And so then what it might allow you to do in that area where there's that change issue is you're sort of having that information at your fingertips all the time in order to get people to start adopting it sort of slowly and pick them off one at a time. But I don't think that it makes a big impact at all in terms of putting this more data intensive approach. I don't think it hurts or adoption at all. It just speeds that process, I would say. Does anyone else want me to bungle their question for them? Or okay, anything else? Or okay. All right, so I'll definitely take some more at the end of that. So as I was mentioning before, this has been a big journey in terms of like how do you really use AI/ML in order to deliver really effective workforce planning as a foundation to share that mirror. But then I think a big issue is in that I've been hearing a lot, and I'm sure you're all hearing in your organizations, and it's settled down a little bit now, I think, which is Gen AI is here and it's changing everything. And so the idea is how do you pivot your strategic workforce planning initiatives to better consider the impact of generative AI on your workforce? So the headlines are, and they're, or have been, AI will take over all the jobs. It's going to improve work for those who embrace it. It's going to create more work. I don't even actually anyone said that, but that's like my cynical view. It's going to create more work because leaders will be like, oh, that's awesome. AI, stay later. Leaders will up the yield, or radically change jobs, fill in the blank. But the alternate viewpoint is that AI could provide a lever to transform workforce planning. So taking us back to this classic model that I shared before of, and it's just basically the most basic of the consulting models of the you have to figure out what you're not change, do more, do less, stop doing. Generative AI may actually sort of X out the biggest bubble because the idea of that is twofold. One is that this is the area that we're sort of running on autopilot to an extent. This is the area that we can predict most likely what our future headcount is, and we don't get a ton of value of really twizzling those numbers a lot and things like that. But this is the area also where AI will help to basically do either more of those jobs or have fewer of those people in those jobs. And so that's a big change when you actually think about the way you used to think about how am I going to change my predictive plan. Now you're thinking about it from a whole different lens where you lose one of your go-to strategies, so to speak, with that. So then with AI and workforce planning, the idea is how will AI change demand? And we already looked at the supply of all these different things like that. But so then you're going to think about strategic human capability to maximize and expand. You're going to think about capability needing fewer humans, and you're thinking about capability that can be done without humans. So now that becomes a key part of your quotient where you're thinking about this, where you're thinking about, okay, this is what we're likely to do. We're picking up on early signals in our predictive modeling of like how jobs are going down. But then we really want to start thinking about something around like a job automation index in terms of our planning. And so, if you read like some McKinsey report and they go 60% of this could be automated, you're never gonna get that 60, maybe you'll get 30, right? There's a human behavior and the friction that'll come the way. But if you have your right divisor on that, you can start thinking about how much will each job be and what's our decreased need for that. And then from workforce supply, you're gonna have to start thinking about AI supply. And this will create a big change and shift where you'll have your Gen I changes the workforce management focus, where your lens will be for strategic capability will be your competitive advantage. Your key capability will be your profit, and core capability will be cost. And then you'll think about headcount planning is how can we do more with these roles? And so I think there's a certain viewpoint about this, and this is sort of like, I think when I came into HR consulting, the business, everybody was at that point was exalting like General Electric at that point, which is like really a far-fetched concept today and those things like that, but for their models and things like that. But there used to be this notion that you would figure out what your core capabilities are and you would maximize on them. And there's a possibility that then there's sort of all these disruptions, right? The disruptions of all the different types of technologies. Things were moving too fast. Everybody started doing things differently. There's this one notion around it, which is that, okay, now that AI is our tool and our friend in all this, we can actually start thinking more about these core capabilities and maximize them. And many companies can start thinking about that because they'll have people who will be freed up to do more of that. From a key capability, you're going to augment those roles. From core capability, you're going to reduce your headcount through AI. From hiring, you might move to exception-based hiring. And that's a key difference as well, where I advocated before that many organizations, when they have a key gap today, they rush to fill it in the market. But with advanced notice and more tools to take away work that jobs can be separated into, you might start thinking about like, hey, we actually don't need to hire for these jobs. We don't need to go to market. We don't need to do, I was talking to someone recently, they're talking about how jobs are escalating like in the Valley because 20% more here, 20% more people hired. You might move away from that a little bit because you could actually build your own. And the productivity focus is around either effectiveness or efficiency. And then I'll revisit this chart right here, which is, it looks almost exactly the same. So I had to put the green box just so you can see it's different. So the idea is that your whole company could become more of an intern model, which is kind of, I think, the original notion a lot of companies had, sort of like in the stayed age where people stayed at a company for a long time. Instead of having an intern model, you start thinking about growing your own because what you're doing is you're leveraging all the savings that generative AI will provide in your jobs and allow it to actually build your own and to augment your model. And so in this idyllic state of my formula before, I have my 50 people, I have 15 lost for attrition, I have less mobility because I'm more in control of it, but I still want to, I still need to cater to human needs and changes. And I have this big input of plus 16 for my forecast grow model. Ending at 52, I have 0 gaps. I don't have to go to market for this critical role at all. So that's kind of like the illustration of like, how can I change? Same formula, same thing, but this big shift in just one of the levers that might occur. And then the final point I have around this is that I think we're left with some foundational questions, and organizations have to decide, I think, to some degree. And I guess it's hard to say, right? Because it's like when you're in the middle of sort of a big sea change that you're hearing about and you're wondering like how much will generative AI really change our workforces? You have to kind of like at least think through that. You might not believe, you might be skeptical. You might be like, I've seen this before in different busts of different things before. But if you do believe in it, you have to think about, do you want to be role-based, skill-based, or task-based? And so do you want to lean into your role-based structure? Are you an organization that's really about that competitive capability, those competencies that you want to do more in the market with? Then you lean into your role-based format and you really focus on that org capability. Do you want to be a skill-based organization? I'm sort of wondering if that's the thing. Like, is skills just the pathway to really a task-based organization? But skill-based, you not think about jobs. You actually try to use ML to really do everything by skills. Or do you want to be a task-based organization? And that's where you take some concepts that before were largely sort of poo-pooed by strategic workforce plannings of resource management, where basically you're thinking about we're this matrix organization, we're all these people with different skills, they'll do different tasks. We're maybe an organization that has to be efficient and sort of either a low-cost provider or a most nimble provider or most time-effective provider. And can we use this to understand how we actually start allocating people to different assignments over time where nobody really has a job. They just have a series of assignments and they do that. So I think this is where it comes into the Gen AI. How do you want to approach it? Do you want to approach it where you're like, okay, I'm going to take these savings and distribute them, and I'm going to do that and become more of a task-based organization? Or do you say, I'm going to take these savings and reinvest them because I'm a certain kind of market leader and I see certain kind of opportunities, and I really want to invest in those capabilities so that I'm actually doing 2 or 3 times as much with these? So those are like the foundation. I don't have the answers to these at all. These are things I think that we should be thinking about right now as we see how Gen AI is changing workforce planning. And that's right it. I got my 5-minute warning, ready for questions, and it looks like I am on Q&A.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Do we have any questions? All right, right down here.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you. Very informative session. Just in relation to capabilities, you mentioned strategic key and core capabilities.
Yeah.
From your experience with projects you worked with for multiple organizations, what are some of the factors or elements that they would have put into selecting their strategic key and core capabilities within the organization?
I mean, I think it depends all the time, but I think what it comes back to like a process where you have to go and you have to think about like what differentiates us as an organization. And there's been a lot of literature about it over time. I think the most important element is like not getting too tied to a specific model, right? Because these models like lead you to undesirable places sometimes. And I think like there's the story in the past where Disney decided that like some role was its most critical role, and everyone was like, yeah, everyone was like shocked by it or something like that. Or like, or McDonald's was like, we just need to have clean bathrooms the rest of the time. We're golden, we'll be the leader, or something like that. So you don't want to take it too far, but I think you just really try to parse out your differentiation. You try to compare that to differentiate others, make sure it's true differentiation. And then you say, what's that org capability and what jobs most do that? And then the extent that you have more in skills, that might help identify that too, in terms of that, in terms of that. So that, yeah.
Question in the back. Ahmed?
Hey, Peter. So good to see you.
Nice to see you too.
I don't know if it's been considered in another session or earlier. I came a little late, sorry. But another aspect of Gen AI or AI now is agentic AI, so agents running around doing things. Do you foresee a future where the agents are part of the workforce planning process? You have human carbon-based units, silicon-based units, and then does life get even more miserable now that we have to work with IT as well as finance?
Yes, no, yes, yes. No, so I don't actually think anyone has the answer to that question yet, whether to consider as demand or supply, right? Like the easy path, if you want to say this is due by 5 p.m. today, would be to consider an adjustment on demand, right? And that's handled in a different way. And then you can think about your supply in the context of the remaining demand. So I think that's a picture that I painted, which is the easier part to do. I think the more important way that will emerge is it will be both. And I hope they'll be kind of through that lensing that happens, where I think that if you're going to be more of a role-based organization, I think you would take the former approach, which is like, let's stick to our guns and be like a role-based organization. And then let's think about adjusting what that business demand is, of what we need, or then expand that demand. But if you're going to become a task-based organization, then I think it's going to have to be agentic like that, as you're mentioning. I think that's when you start thinking about that. You start thinking about what happens and measuring it, and then sort of automating that process of that assignment, where it's just sort of something that happens on a small level. And I think it's like a sandbox approach, right? You're like, hey, let's take these 10% tasks. Like we work with some companies who are like, hey, we have like 200 people who like 2% of the schedule is this. Well, maybe that's the part you start seeing if it's appropriate for it, how you do that. I think these agentic agents will be great to work with.
Especially if they do my job for me. No, I was kidding.
That's right.
I think we have time for one more question. All right, right down here.
Is there a way of combining qualitative forecasting like the Delphi method, where we do like anonymous committees with predictive forecasting of demand?
Yes, I think Ahmed has a game for that, right? We never finished that. I think there should be. I mean, what do you think? There should be, right?
Peter and I many years ago wanted to create a game called Workforce Planning. The game, a computer simulation like SimCity.
We never quite got to it, but it could happen. It could be. This could be this could be a re-inspiration. You could be. We'll name it after you.
Awesome.
No, but I think that could be a very interesting sort of experiment too to try in terms of combining the two approaches and comparing them. I mean, there's a real beauty to scenario planning. Like one of the things is that people always talk about when I do scenario planning and they struggle to come up with their one plan. You're like, what the heck, right? You can't even do one plan and you're so worried about all this. But the idea that you have these different models that each can readily create a scenario plan, you can hold them up to each other. And if they're different, that like being wrong in workforce planning is awesome because it actually shows like I'm missing some information that I needed off the business. You're actually kind of going out there hoping to be wrong some of the time and you have to sell a little bit the beauty of that too. Yeah.
All right. Great question. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone.